not only in nephrology, but I think in basic and clinical science, in organ functions in general, in cardiology, neurology, hepatology, and obviously nephrology. So, what is it? Sure. Thank you. So I'm going to just focus a little bit on common biological pathways that lead to end-stage kidney failure and works in end-stage kidney failure. So this is my little bird. My son has actually other birds, and they realize that they are beautiful. But just, I use this a lot, and I think some people who have heard me before. The crow is mentioned in the Quran, obviously, in the table, in the chapter, the table. And God mentioned there that he has sent the crow to teach, to actually, to search. So we learn that the crow teach humans how to search, لِيُرِيَهُ كَيْفَ يُوَارِثَ وَتَخِي, to show him. So it's very important to reflect a little bit of what has made for us to reflect and learn from this, that we need to search and share. So I like the example. And one other reason why is in Egypt, for our colleagues from elsewhere, somehow when you describe someone as a crow, it's like a pig. So people don't like that. So although it is in the faith, but we don't really learn, and we need really to really correct our misinformation about that. So let's go on. So what is inflammation? It's very basic. It's reaction to remove or inactivate what is non-cell. And during this, there is basically a higher purpose, that is to repair at the same time in addition to remove. So inflammation is good. In actual fact, all of us sitting now probably going through a low stage of or low grade inflammation, otherwise our organs won't work. So you need a little bit of inflammation to keep working, but too much of it is bad. That's a problem. So the target goal is really to remove what is foreign to you or actually noxious. Because now we believe, and people who are studying immunology now, we start to change faith. The old theory that immunology is to identify what is foreign for you. Now I think we're becoming civilized, like immigration laws. It doesn't matter who is foreign. It's the foreigner who is actually noxious to you, someone who would hurt you. So the immune system and the inflammatory system is very clever. If anything foreign but doesn't hurt you, it ignores it. It will accept it. But only it will react if it is really, it will harm you. There are cells that are very important. The first cells to respond are the monocytes and natural killer cells, and T lymphocytes also are primary cells. I want to share with you basic concepts, and that's very important because I think this is the language of inflammation and immunology at large now. We call it danger signal. So anything that could hurt you, rather than being foreign alone, it has to be foreign and hurtful to you. That would be called danger signal. And those are two components. It would be pathogen-associated molecular pattern, PAMPs. Those are foreign, small polypeptides. It could be carbohydrates. And once we see them, the immune system and the inflammatory system won't like them. So it would react to them. Those could be also danger-associated molecular patterns that comes from us. And that usually comes after tissue necrosis. Apoptosis, for many, many years, we thought it's good because it's a controlled way of really eliminating what we don't like. But those small apoptotic material, those microparticles even we talked about in the CKD and so on, could work as damps. And those damps actually could be seen by the immune inflammatory system and lead to inflammation. So please remember PAMPs and DAMPs. And to make it simpler or more complex, how we see them, there is sensors, pattern recognition receptors, PRRS, and there are different ways how to see them. Those are receptors on the antigen-presenting cells. Once we see TAMPs or PAMPs, what will happen is that the tissue, for example, macrophage or dendritic cells or natural killer cells, will see those through those receptors. Those are classical receptors. And if you want to look at the wonderful creation of you while you are sitting enjoying your time and not knowing what's inside you, just the number of those molecules. The C-type lectin, there are at least 4,000 isotypes. So there is no way on earth that there will be an external material that's not going to be screened by your immune system or inflammatory system. Just forget it. We have a very potent receptors cells here. And each one obviously is divided into different things and see different ways. And that takes really long hours to go through the specifics. I just want you to appreciate really how we see foreignness in terms of what is danger to you. So that's how we see. This is an excellent article. I would recommend it to all of us, and I enjoyed very much reading it. Science 2013, January. This last January 13 in Science. The whole issue is on inflammation. So we see anything that's foreign and bad for us, such as infection or injury, okay? And those will be PAMs or DAMs. Those will be inducers. We have receptors on the antigen-presenting cells, and we have amplifiers to make it worse, transducers, and then the inflammatory system and the immune system will see that foreignness and they start to react. It's like the neurological response. You have basically pain stimulus, and then you have basically an afferent central nervous system effector response. So the same thing, that's how we see what is foreign to us. Metzinger in 1994, who actually proposed the theory that what's important for us is what's hurtful. So it is not absolute foreignness. It's what's foreign and could hurt you. So any signals we present through those PAMs and DAMs, and those will be seen by particular receptors on antigen-presenting cells, will be amplified by different cytokines and chemokines, and then the immune system will respond to that, and the inflammatory system. So this is an important basic, because this is basics to not only nephrology, but all students of immunology and basic science and inflammation. Many human antigen-presenting cells, monocytes, we can identify them by specific basically markers. It's not one, there are several of them, and even people debate now, there's classical, intermediate, not classical, and you can see that the functions may be different. Now people debate there may be a type 4 monocytes. Why is that? Because the monocyte is like all of us, have different rules. One type of monocytes, like the classical one, they will come early. They will try to defend you. It's like your army. Then after this, you have the M2 that will come and say, well, enough is enough. I'm coming to repair the tissue. So there is already a system built in to eliminate what is foreign and to repair the mess after the inflammatory process. In general, we call them M1, pro-inflammatory monocyte or macrophage, M2, wound healing, M2B, anti-inflammatory, because it produces a lot of IL-10, and M2C, which is actually anti-M1. So within the army, there is a hierarchy. And the beauty is that they don't come at the same time. They are quite orchestrated. So M1 will come first, followed by M2, and then M22. Why? Because if you have M1 only and you have inflammation, you need to check this inflammation at some point and say enough, and we need to stop. Otherwise, the whole body will be in a vicious circle of inflammation. You will burn yourself. The other important cells that we tend to depreciate, unfortunately, is the dendritic cells. Dendritic cells could be present in tissues, and they could mature, and they are even more potent in seeing what is foreign and hurtful to the body than the monocytes. And I'll just direct you to excellent two articles here in experimental renal inflammation and in human renal disease. These are important articles for those who are interested to know. The dendritic cells are present in the interstitium of normal kidneys. They are important there as scavengers. Anything that comes, they will react to it. But too many of them is bad to the body. And that's how they work. So you have immature dendritic cells. When they see antigen, they will capture them exactly the same like macrophages. They will migrate, go to the secondary lymphoid tissue, where they will marry with the T cells, and the T cells is like the central intelligence agency. When the T cell is activated, it will tell the immune system what is the fate of what's foreign, and basically the T and B cellular response will take care of the foreigners. You could react by eliminating the foreigner, invading cells, or you could produce actually tolerizing system to accept the cells, the foreign cells. Again, the dendritic cells go through phases, and I don't have much time to go through this, but they are very tricky cells because you can make them tolerizing. And there are many protocols now using tolerized dendritic cells in many autoimmune disease and definitely in transplantation. And as you mature, you become exhausted. But mature dendritic cells are extremely potent like macrophages, and they produce a lot of inflammatory molecules similar to macrophages. And here, for example, is stimulatory dendritic cells. Those are good against foreign invaders, but bad if you want to really use them in transplantation because they cause rejection. Again, there are different subtypes of dendritic cells, and we'll skip this for the sake of time. And they do react when they see the foreign antigens with the naive cells, and they will give the naive cell the signal to produce particular battery of cytokines, and based on this, the T lymphocyte will decide which type of T cell response. T lymphocytes are different subtypes. And remember, all those cells react with the macrophages, so they are part of the inflammatory system. We do not now differentiate between what's called basic immunology and basic inflammatory system. They basically quite work together, and there is a lot of feedback mechanisms between many of those cells. I will skip this. So how do those cells work? They produce a lot of cytokines, but I want to draw your attention here to the chemokines. There are now about 50 chemokines, and for example, CCL1 to 28 means there are 28 chemokine ligand 1, chemokine ligand 2, 3, 4, and so on. And those are basically the weapons that the antigen-presenting cells, including dendritic cells, and many of even epithelial cells, endothelial cells in the kidney will produce also. So I want you to see those families are weaponry, and they basically work in different ways to respond, and obviously some of them are pro-inflammatory, some of them will aggravate tumor progression, some of them angiogenic, and so on. So there is a lot to be said in the way how they work. They are basically 4 subfamilies. They bind to membrane glycosamine glycans, and they work in a very fancy way. Here, for example, basically chemokine ligand 25, it will bind to chemokine receptor 9, and those are selective. But we have many chemokines that work through shared, basically, receptors. Let's get this here. And this is the way how they work, a very intelligent way we have to learn from them. So you have the monocytes, for example, once they express the chemokine receptor, the chemokine ligand will bind to it and will help to roll on the monocytes on the endothelium until it sees a little hole in the endothelium to go through it. So it does this, it increases the adhesion between the inflammatory cells and the surface epithelial or endothelial, doesn't matter, and it would help the movement of the macrophages to go through deep through the tissue. This is exactly what happened in atherosclerosis plaques, and that happens in the kidney, in cardiac fibrosis, and the liver fibrosis, the same. three different ways how those chemokines aggravate tissue invasion by macrophages and dendritic cells. So the function of the chemokines, they are produced by literally all cells of the kidney for sure, and different subtypes of kidney cells produce different types of chemokines. They coordinate the leukocyte trafficking under hemostatic and inflammatory conditions, and they are major weapons produced by the antigen-presenting cells. Just to show you, for example, if you block some of those receptors, you could actually protect against even diabetic nephropathy. And I choose this paper because we think diabetic nephropathy is a metabolic disease. Well, it starts as metabolic, but it is an inflammatory condition. And that's very important to us to appreciate not only diabetes, hopefully at some point when we have those medicines available. There are now textbooks in chemokine drugs like chemokine receptor blockers and so on. I know that there is phase 2 trial in inflammatory kidney diseases and in diabetes as we speak being performed. Okay, I will skip this again. So what is the fate of inflammation in general? Well, in general, we hope for resolution, right? That you hope for. But sometimes it doesn't work, and then it will go into a chronic phase. By definition, chronic inflammation means a state where there is a repair and ongoing destruction. That's the best definition I can find, because what's chronic inflammation means? Is it by time, by duration, by fibrosis? So the best definition I could find is that when you have the two processes happening, destruction and repair. And obviously, eventually, our unfortunate fibrosis comes in, and that leads to end organ damage. So how is inflammation in general be resolved? Well, God has created for us, so he made it for us easy by creating anti-inflammatory cells and molecules. For example, the transformer growth factor beta 1, IL-10 definitely, many of the other cytokines. Decoy receptors, very interesting. Some of those receptors, once they bind to the ligand, they tend to activate the cells. But some of them could work as a decoy without having a distal signal inside the cell. So they tend to take the ligand, and eventually there will be no intracellular activation. And that's a way how sometimes you downregulate the inflammatory cascade. There are metabolizing enzymes, obviously. You could dilute the inflammatory molecules and many other. Those molecules are present in the kidney, by the way. And one interesting phenomenon actually is that those inflammatory macrophages, sometimes you think they're like humans. They come to an inflamed place, they do the job, and thank you very much, and they leave you. So sometimes they do that. So don't think of them as basically they are not targeted, they don't have intelligence. They have their own intelligence. It's just we don't know how to communicate with them. So how inflammation persists? Because I think that's important for chronic disease. Well, persistence of the antigen is obvious. And remember, antigen here could be foreign or indigenous. Okay, that's important. Indigenous, from any previous damage, you expose new previously concealed antigens inside the cells. Clonal expansion or de-inhibition or apoptosis or defective anti-inflammatory cascade such as immunosuppression sometimes could work paradoxically. So let me move. This is important to take so we can understand what happens in the kidney. We understand that chronic hypoxia is a mechanism, at least for now, as the probably the strongest theory behind the progression in chronic kidney disease. Since basically it's Leon Fine is the one who started the whole argument, and there is a lot to be said. If I leave you something to take home is simply hypoxia and what does it cause to the kidney as a mechanism of both acute kidney injury and chronic progressive renal disease. So why that happened? We know that the kidney interstitium is vulnerable. Why? Because of the low oxygen tension. We know that the peritubular capillary hypoxia is quite important here because the peritubular capillary oxygen tension is almost on the threshold. So any stress because of inflammation will lead to real overt hypoxia and tissue damage. And that's the way how it works. These are many molecules. So the peritubular endothelium here, and you'll have it. You can just read the initial article because I think that's very important landmark. That's what I'm talking about, the peritubular capillary network. So just to orient you very quickly, this is the glomerulus. And as we see the tubular structure, we have also the arteriovenous structure. So you have the renal artery, the glomerulus, you have the afferent and efferent, and it basically gives you here a very beautiful peritubular capillary network that really goes surrounding the tubules, proximal, lobophilar, distal tubules, and this is important for the physiology of the kidney. But the problem is that we shift the oxygen because of the countercurrent basically mechanism, and by doing this we leave a low oxygen tension there. So any minor damage can lead to serious devastating problem in the interstitium, and that's how it works. This is an important paper, and just allow me to take you through it. This is American Journal of Physiology, just to show the elegance of the experiment. So what they did is that they followed 16 patients who received a transplant, 8 living related and 8 from deceased kidneys. And they basically used dark microscope with a CT scan looking at the blood flow in the kidney itself. And they could identify early damage of the peritubular capillary endothelium with a decreased blood flow even in some of the living donors. So here is the staining intensity of basically the stain they use here for evidence of the aminoglycan. Here you can see selectin staining, which you shouldn't see in the uncontrolled diseased kidneys. But you look at the intensity among the living kidneys, you still have 3 that have some staining. The message here is that a little bit of decreased blood flow, even in this situation, leads to peritubular capillary damage because of the very minimal tight oxygen tension at this level. And that's how it works. So you have here the epithelial cells, for example. As long as you have an intact basement membrane, you hope that the epithelial cells will regenerate nicely. This is a peritubular capillary, and naturally there will be some lymphocytes like macrophage going through without problem. Remember, the PE2 here is almost on the verge of being critical. Natural repair will go fine. The problem is that if you have significant problem and you lose the basement membrane, then that will create adhesion and inflammation in the pericapillary endothelium that's facing the epithelial cells, and that would allow a lot of inflammatory cells to come through the capillary here. And once you have lots of inflammatory cells going through the capillary, they will clog the capillary, and that will cause simply complete blockage, and that would lead to capillary loss. That's the mechanism of what we call capillary rarefaction. That's how we lose the capillaries under low oxygen tension in any situation where there is either inflammation as a primary mechanism or hypoxia, which lead to a lot of inflammatory cells coming there and leading to pericapillary inflammation and stagnation of cells and blockage of the pericapillary, and that leads to interstitial hypoxia, which actually aggravates a cascade of more hypoxia, more macrophage to come, and that will create a problem. That's exactly why we see lots of macrophages. Naturally, we see it in lupus, but even in ureterial obstruction, you see lymphocytes. That's the reason why. Because when you produce ureteric obstruction, like in a mouse model, you produce a reflex vasospasm, and that will decrease the glomerular blood flow, and that will reflect on a decreased blood flow through the peritubular capillary, which leads to inflammation. So remember the message here, It doesn't matter the initial consult. Obviously, it matters because it's the initial one. But eventually, what counts is the macrophages and the inflammation and the hypoxia that takes the person into a vicious circle. So here again, you have a tubules, a capillary, and once you have a lot of those cells, they will invade the interstitium and they will invade the tubular structure, leading to all those biomarkers that we usually try to identify which is biomarker is good to use for AKI or in actual fact for CKD also. So I want to just take you through two last slides, but they are important, then I will stop here. So that's what we think that's what's normal. So you have tubular structures, nice, beautiful epithelial cells, and you have a peritubular capillary. You have a fancy cell here called pericyte. This pericyte has one important function. It keeps the capillary open, so it prevents it from collapsing. Okay, and at the same time, you have fibroblast here, and those fibroblasts is important to maintain a basically healthy connective tissue here, because I didn't talk about the matrix, which is a big subject in its own. So that is under normal conditions. So once you have hypoxia and they have lots of inflammatory cells, those pericytes will leave their sites. In addition, those peritubular capillaries will start to collapse and they will get lost. And that's why when you biopsy a chronic kidney disease, you don't see capillaries. In actual fact, the number of capillaries in the interstitium is important in terms of prognostication, definitely in transplantation as well as in native kidney diseases. This is a remarkable paper that I'll invite particularly those who are going to their MD exams to really read this and reflect on it, how we really translate the acute injury into chronic damage. And this is the salient picture that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully I'll stop after this. Again, here is the tubules. You have fibroblast under normal conditions. You have some epithelial cell that need to regenerate and everything is okay. But under pressure from inflammation and ischemia, those epithelial cells will degenerate and they will actually depart and they will regress back to their origin, which is mesenchymal. And that's what we call epithelial mesenchymal basically transformation, EMT. So I want you to remember this. That's what we think what happens in terms of the cause, the molecular cause of progression in kidney disease. So I would take you through the last slide. Again, this is from the same article, Science, that I just shared with you this last January. That's what we think happening in the kidney. So you have initial damage from whatever organs, that would be PAMPs, that basically exogenous foreign antigens, and the inflammatory response will go fine, you respond, and you will get rid of it, and eventually you have normal tissue. What happens in chronic kidney disease is that because of the significant initial damage, you will be left with a lot of DAMPs, indigenous foreign microparticles, and those will keep the cascade going on and on and on, and that would lead to macrophage infiltration and chronic fibrosis based on the tubular injury that I shared with you. I think I will stop here, and I will just go through the conclusion. So initial damage in the kidney leads to ongoing low-grade hypoxia. Hypoxia leads to persistent macrophage activation, and that would lead to peritubular capillary rarefaction. Tissue apoptosis from that process will lead to EMT and fibrosis. And that's what we think happening in a chronic kidney disease. The good news, and I think I'll stop here, is that there are now several molecules that at least being tested in animal models. So we hope at certain time that will be clinical trial using anti-fibrotic medications to reverse the process. I'm sharing some of those articles here. They will have them for those who are interested to really, I think it's a presentation, but just some of the material here to read. So I'll stop here and Thank you very much for your attention.